Warning. What you are about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
California, 1969. The oldest cold case ever solved. DNA named her killer 51 years later. And I need you to hear that number again. 51 years. That's how long a killer walked free. After kicking down a young woman's door in San Diego and strangling her in her own living room. Her name was Mary Scott. She was 23, a mother of 2 little girls. And the man who did it? He moved across the country. He got married. He built a career. He retired. He grew old in peace. Here's what I want you to remember instead of him. A young woman called Lucky, who danced, who was loved, who never missed a shift, who was rebuilding her whole life for 2 little girls, and a baby sister who kept knocking until the truth answered. Because here's the thing. There are hundreds of thousands of unsolved cases in America right now, and many of them have evidence sitting in storage at this very moment, waiting for one phone call, like Rosalie's. If your family has one, ask. The DNA is patient. It waited 51 years for Mary. It's still waiting for others. If this story moved you, share it. Somebody out there has a drawer that needs opening. And subscribe to Crime Watch Hub, because the next cold case we crack open might be the one somebody's been waiting 50 years to hear. California, 1969. The oldest cold case solved. DNA named her killer 51 years later. 51 years. I need that number to actually land. Because that's not a detail in this story. That is the story. In November of 1969, in San Diego, a man kicked in the door of a young woman's apartment. Her name was Mary Scott. She was 23, a mother of 2 little girls. She was strangled inside her own home. And the man who did it simply walked out into the night. No arrest, no suspect, no name. For 51 years, he crossed the country. He built a career. He married. He retired. He grew old as a free man, while Mary's family grew old inside a question that never closed. Now here's why this case is different from every cold case you've ever heard. When this one finally broke, it set a record. The longest gap between crime and conviction in San Diego County history. And it wasn't broken by a confession. It wasn't broken by a witness or a tip line. It was broken by a family tree. Strangers, mailing off DNA kits to learn about their ancestors, had no idea they were quietly building a road that led straight to a killer's front door. But that's only half of it. Because when the verdict finally came, this story delivered one last twist. One nobody in that courtroom could stop. The law caught him. But the calendar protected him. You'll understand exactly what that means by the end. And I promise you, it will not sit right. So how does a case stay frozen for half a century and then crack wide open? It comes down to one fact. The night he walked out of that apartment, the killer made a single mistake. He left something behind. He couldn't see it. Police couldn't see it. In 1969, no scientist on Earth could even read it. But it never left that evidence room. And it never stopped telling the truth. This is the story of what it said. And the little sister who finally made the world listen. It starts with a door on 39th Street. Take a look at this for a moment. A ground-floor apartment. The 4000 block of 39th Street. A working-class San Diego neighborhood called City Heights. November 20th, 1969. Sometime that night, the front door gave way. Not picked, not pried. Kicked in, with enough force to rip the chain lock, clean off the frame. Neighbors heard screaming. They heard crashing. And the room itself recorded everything that happened next. Furniture overturned. An ashtray smashed on the floor. A living room torn apart by a struggle. Whoever was inside that apartment did not give up. She fought. Hard enough to wreck the room around her. Her jaw was broken during the attack. Prosecutors would later state it plainly. She was raped, then strangled, in her own home, behind her own door, the one place anyone should be safe. Her name was Mary Scott, and before we go one step further, you need to know who was inside that apartment. Not the headline version, the real one, because every fact about Mary is about to matter to this investigation. Fact 1. She married young, 17 years old. A whirlwind romance with a Navy sailor. 2 daughters came quickly, Christine and Donna, but the marriage broke apart, and Mary faced an impossible situation. Young, on her own, no money for childcare. So she made the hardest decision of her life. She placed her girls with their father's family while she worked to rebuild. That's why she was living alone in that small apartment in City Heights. Fact 2. Her job. Mary danced at a club near her home called the Star and Garter. In 1969, go-go dancing was mainstream entertainment. Ordinary work. A paycheck, a few blocks from her front door. Her co-workers there gave her a nickname, Lucky, and that nickname came with a reputation. Lucky was reliable. Lucky showed up. Lucky never missed a shift. Hold that thought, because in a few minutes, that exact reputation becomes evidence. Fact 3. And this one comes from her baby sister. Rosalie was 16 in 1969, the youngest of the siblings. And years later, she described Mary in a way that cuts through every headline ever written about this case. Mary was the kindest and gentlest of all of them. The other siblings would tell little Rosalie to go home. Nobody wants the baby sister tagging along. Mary was the one who smiled and said, "Let her come." That's who was behind that door on November 20th. A 23-year-old rebuilding her life, piece by piece, with one goal at the center of it: bringing Christine and Donna home. Now, let's walk through her last known movements. That evening, Mary took a cab home. The driver dropped her off at her apartment on 39th Street. A routine fare, a short ride. Nothing unusual about it at all. But mark this man. Remember the cab driver, because he was one of the last people to see Mary Scott alive. And decades from this night, he is going to raise his right hand in a courtroom. That's all I'll say for now. So Mary is home. The door is locked. The chain is on. And somewhere in that same part of the city, investigators would later determine, roughly a mile or 2 away, was a man in his 20s, a former Navy sailor. He'd been stationed in San Diego through the late 1960s. By this point, he was out of the service. And here is the fact that makes this case genuinely frightening. No one has ever proven any connection between this man and Mary. Not friends, not acquaintances, not even a single documented encounter. Investigators never established that they'd ever met, which means when that door came off its chain, the person on the other side was, as far as anyone can prove, a total stranger. No warning, no history, no reason anyone has ever found. Police never released a motive. Not then, not since. Now stay with me, because everything in this story turns on what happened as he left. The attack ended. The apartment went quiet. The man walked out into the San Diego night, and he carried away every advantage: darkness, anonymity, a city of strangers, and no witnesses who could put a name to him. But he didn't leave clean. Somewhere in that apartment, he left biological evidence behind. Traces of himself. He couldn't see it. He had no reason to even think about it, because in 1969, that material was worthless to any detective on the planet. There was no test, no database, no science that could turn it into a name. It was simply collected, sealed, and stored, invisible, silent. And as it turned out, patient. That evidence is the spine of everything you're about to watch. Every chapter from here is the story of the world, slowly learning how to hear it. And that's exactly why this channel exists. Crime Watch Hub is where forgotten cold cases get pulled back out of the drawer. The cases that went quiet for 20, 30, 50 years, until science or one stubborn family member forced them back open. If those are the stories that grip you, hit subscribe right now, because Mary's case is one of the greatest examples in American history, and it's about to prove that no case is ever truly closed. Back to 39th Street. The night passes. The apartment stays silent. The city wakes up and moves on, like nothing happened. And then comes the detail that starts the clock on this entire investigation. The next morning, Lucky didn't show up for work. And Lucky never missed work. November 21st, the morning after. At the Star and Garter, a shift starts, with an empty spot in it. Mary's spot. Her co-workers don't shrug it off. They don't assume she's running late. They know her better than that. Within hours, a worried friend is standing outside her apartment. And it's that friend who finds her. I'm not going to walk you back inside. You already know what that room looked like. What matters now is what that friend carried out of that doorway. A memory. Precise. Permanent. Because more than 50 years later, that friend will describe that morning under oath. That's the second witness this case will preserve. Keep counting with me. Okay, stay with me. Because now the machinery of 1969 kicks into motion. San Diego police launched a full investigation. And let's be fair to them. They worked this case. They canvassed the neighborhood door by door. They chased down the reports of screaming in the night, trying to nail down times, trying to find anyone who saw a face, a car, anything. Decades later, a San Diego police lieutenant named Matt Dobbs summed up that original effort in 4 words. Investigators, exhausted, all leads. Not some leads. All of them. So where do detectives look when a woman is killed at home? In 1969, the playbook was universal. You start with the men in her life. 2 men came under the microscope, an ex-boyfriend, and the man Mary was seeing at the time of her death. Both were questioned. Both were looked at hard. And both said the same thing. Not me. Now here's the part I need you to sit with. Both of those men were telling the truth. Decades later, science would clear them, completely and definitively. We'll get to exactly how, but in 1969, there was no way to prove innocence, any more than guilt, so no charges were ever filed. And no cloud was ever lifted. 2 innocent men walked out of those interview rooms and into decades of quiet suspicion. Friends wondering, neighbors whispering, a question mark hanging over both their names with no expiration date. Their only connection to this crime was caring about the woman it was committed against. Now watch this. Because here's why the case couldn't move. It's not that the evidence was weak. It's that the tools didn't exist. Let me show you exactly what a detective in 1969 was working with. Fingerprints, blood typing, which could only sort people into broad groups, eyewitnesses, and shoe leather. That's it. That was the entire toolbox. DNA testing. The concept didn't exist in any police department anywhere on Earth. The science wouldn't touch an American criminal case for nearly 2 more decades. A national offender database. Also nothing. No computer system connecting crimes across cities. No registry to search. No profile to compare. So think about what that means for Mary's case. Investigators collected biological evidence from that apartment. Material left behind by her attacker. They were holding the single most valuable clue in the entire investigation, and they had no possible way to know it. The evidence could speak. It had a name inside it. But in 1969, nobody could read the language. Which brings us to the hinge. This whole story swings on. At some point, someone in the San Diego system made a decision about that evidence. Keep it, seal it, label it, store it. We don't know their name. There's no plaque for them anywhere. It was paperwork. Routine. Probably decided in seconds. But understand what that choice was up against. Evidence rooms fill up. Departments move buildings. Old cases get purged to make space for new ones. 50 years is a long time for a sealed envelope to survive. One flood. One cleanup order. One clerk deciding a 1969 file no longer matters. Any one of those. And this video ends with no Chapter 3. Remember that anonymous decision. Every single thing that happens next depends on it. But nothing happened next. Not for years. Tips dried up. The canvas produced no suspect. The men who were scrutinized led nowhere because they were the wrong men. Mary Scott's murder went cold, and then something else set in. Slower than the case going cold, and in its own way, just as damaging. The way Mary was remembered started to shrink. When the case was mentioned at all, it came with a label. Her sister Rosalie remembers the headline, word for word. Go-Go Girl found dead. 4 words. That was the coverage. That was the summary of an entire human being. Rosalie's response to it, years later, was calm and surgical. There was a little more to her than a go-go girl. Think about what that framing did to this investigation's future. A case the public reduces to a job title is a case the public stops asking about. No pressure, no anniversary coverage, no calls for answers. Her parents aged without them. Christine and Donna grew up without their mother and without an explanation. And 16-year-old Rosalie grew into an adult carrying 2 things: grief and a question nobody was working on anymore. So take stock of where this case stands. As the 1970s begin, the witnesses scattered into ordinary life. A cab driver, a friend, young patrol officers who answered a call one November night. The suspects cleared by nothing and condemned by nothing, just left in limbo. The killer gone. No name, no description, no motive. And in an evidence room, one sealed envelope holding the only honest witness this case had left. The file drawer closed, with a killer's name inside it. Written in a language nobody on Earth could read yet. Fast forward 49 years. April 2018. Sacramento, California. Investigators step in front of cameras and announce an arrest that stuns the entire country. The Golden State Killer. One of the most hunted men in American criminal history. In custody. But it's not the arrest itself that changes everything. It's how they found him. No confession. No informant. No lucky fingerprint match. They found him through a family tree. The technique is called forensic genetic genealogy. And I want to break down exactly how it works, because this method is about to collide with Mary's case. Step 1. You start with crime scene DNA from an unknown offender. For decades, police could only do one thing with that: compare it against criminal databases. If your suspect was never arrested, never swabbed, never entered into the system, you got nothing. Dead end. Genetic genealogy flips the entire approach. Step 2. Instead of criminal databases, investigators upload that profile to consumer genealogy databases. The same kind millions of ordinary people use to explore their family history. And here's the shift that matters. They're not searching for the killer. They're searching for his relatives. A partial match here, sharing a small percentage of DNA. Another partial match there. Third cousins. Second cousins once removed. People who have never met the offender. And never will. Step 3 is old-fashioned paper research. Genealogists take those distant matches and start building family trees. Backward first, to find shared ancestors. Then inward, birth records, marriage certificates, obituaries, census pages, branch by branch, generation by generation, narrowing thousands of possible relatives toward the point where the branches converge on one family, then one household, then one person, the right age, the right place, the right time. Now understand what this did to cold cases nationwide. Before 2018, a killer stayed hidden by staying out of the system. Commit the crime, never get arrested again. And the DNA you left behind points at nobody forever. After 2018, that shield was gone, because the killer doesn't control who spits in a tube anymore. His third cousin does. Some curious relative researching their ancestry on a random Tuesday, with no idea they just connected a branch to a 50-year-old crime scene. The offender doesn't need to be in any database on Earth. His family does the work without knowing it. Across the country, families of cold case victims watched that Sacramento announcement and felt something most of them had buried years ago: possibility. And one of those people was Rosalie Sands, 16 years old when this case began. Now watching the news, in her 60s, she read about the science. She understood immediately what it could mean. Because think about what Rosalie knew that the public didn't. Her sister's case had biological evidence, collected in 1969, unreadable for half a century. The exact kind of evidence this method was built for. So in 2019, as the 50th anniversary approached, Rosalie started pushing. She took her question to law enforcement contacts. And the question was direct. The method that caught the Golden State Killer. Why not Mary? Let me be clear about what happened here, because it's the single most important lesson in this entire case. This file did not reopen because of a tip, not a jailhouse letter, not a deathbed statement, not a detective stumbling across an old box. It reopened because a sister asked. 50 years after the fact, one family member walked up to a closed drawer and knocked. And this time, someone answered. The cold case units of the San Diego Police Department and the District Attorney's Office pulled the Mary Scott file. Which brings us to the moment of truth for that anonymous decision. From Chapter 2. Everything now came down to one question. Did the evidence survive? 5 decades had passed. The department had moved buildings. Every detective from 1969 was long gone from the job. Storage gets purged. Seals get broken. Old material degrades. If that envelope was gone, Rosalie's push ends in a form letter. And this case stays frozen permanently. Investigators went looking. It was there, sealed, intact, preserved, through every move, every purge, every year. 50 years of silence, and the only honest witness was still sitting in that room, waiting to be asked. The material went to the lab. A full DNA profile was developed. And now, pay close attention to what the science did first. Because the first result wasn't an identification, it was an exclusion. Before pointing at anyone, investigators tested the profile against the men from 1969. The ex-boyfriend, the boyfriend, the two men who had carried this case on their reputations. For 50 years. Not a match. Not a match. Excluded. Definitively. Scientifically. Both of them. For the family, that one lab result cut in two directions at once. Relief, because the answer was final. It was never anyone Mary knew and trusted. Two clouds lifted after 5 decades. And heartbreak, because with those names cleared, the profile on the table belonged to no one. An unknown man. A genetic fingerprint with no face. No record. No history with Mary. In 1969, that would have been the end of the road. But this wasn't 1969 anymore. That unknown profile was exactly what genetic genealogy was designed to hunt. For the first time in 50 years, investigators could ask the evidence one question. Who are you? And this time, it could answer. Picture a whiteboard in San Diego. Year 2020. At the top, an unknown DNA profile. Below it, nothing but strangers. That's where this hunt begins. The consumer databases came back, with partial matches. Distant relatives of the man who left evidence in Mary's apartment. None of them suspects. None of them aware. Just names, sharing fragments of DNA with a 50-year-old crime scene. Now the narrowing starts. Thousands of potential relatives on the widest branches. The records trim them down to hundreds. Wrong generation, eliminated. Wrong side of the family, eliminated. Died before 1969, eliminated. Hundreds become dozens. Then the filters. Get specific to this case. Male. Old enough to be in his 20s, in November 1969. And the big one. A documented reason to be in San Diego on that exact date. Dozens become a handful. A handful becomes one household. And in the fall of 2020, 51 years after the door on 39th Street, the tree stopped narrowing. One man was left. Right age, right city. And when investigators mapped his 1969 address, it landed roughly a mile or two from Mary's apartment. The same radius you heard about in Chapter 1. His name was John Sipos, 75 years old, living in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania, a quiet community near Allentown, 2,400 miles from City Heights. And this, right here, is why Crime Watch Hub exists. This exact moment, when 50 years of silence turns into a name on an arrest warrant. If you want to see more cases where the evidence outlasts the man and science follows it, all the way to a front door, subscribe right now. Because we've covered cold cases solved after 30, 40, even 50 years. And every one of them has a moment exactly like this one. Now, let's lay out what those 51 years looked like for John Sipos. Fact by fact. In the late 1960s, he was a Navy sailor stationed in San Diego. By November 1969, he was out of the service and living in the city. You already know how close. After that, he left California behind. He built a career in hospital administration and security. Steady work, respectable fields. He married, he retired, and by the time of his arrest, he'd been enjoying that retirement. for more than 20 years, living quietly with his wife in Pennsylvania, a full American life. Career, marriage, pension, peaceful old age. Not one day of it interrupted by this case. When Rosalie learned all this, she named the exact part that hurt the most. It wasn't the arrest. It wasn't reliving 1969. It was finding out he had lived free and happy that entire time. A normal life across all those years. While Mary's future was simply stolen. Mary got 23 years. The man now accused had just been handed his 76th. And one question still had no answer. Why her? Investigators searched. Nothing surfaced. No relationship. No mutual friends. No workplace overlap. Not one shred of evidence that John Sipos and Mary Scott ever exchanged a single word. To this day, no connection has ever been established. I'm stating that once and moving on. Because there's nowhere else to take it. Some questions in this case got answered after 50 years. That one never has been. October 24th, 2020. Officers arrive at a home in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania. For context, Mary's case file was older than some of the arresting officers. John Sipos was taken into custody on suspicion of murder, held on $3 million bail. 51 years after November 20th, 1969, ended by a knock at his own front door. Think about the symmetry of that. This case began with a door forced open. It broke with a door answered. Then came his response to detectives. And it's one of the strangest details in this entire story. He didn't present an alibi. He didn't say, "You have the wrong man. I was never near 39th Street." According to reporting, he claimed he had no memory of the murder. No memory. Not a denial of presence. Not an explanation. An absence. Now, he was 75 years old. And to be fair, his health issues would become part of the court record. But that phrase sat with investigators. And I'd bet it's sitting with you right now. Sipos waived his extradition fight. No resistance. No months of legal delay. He was flown back to San Diego. Back to the city he'd left half a century earlier. Back into a case file. Opened when Richard Nixon was in his first year as president. December 2020. The arraignment. John Sipos stood in a San Diego courtroom and entered his plea. Not guilty. Understand what that plea set in motion. No confession meant no shortcut. The DNA, the genealogy, the 51 years, none of it would matter unless it survived. A full criminal trial. Prosecutors would have to prove to 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt that the man in that courtroom was the man inside that apartment, using witnesses in their 70s and 80s, using science that didn't exist when the crime occurred, using evidence older than half the courtroom. A 1969 murder was about to be tried in a 2022 courtroom, and the defense had a plan. 12 witnesses, 2 days. One question: is there enough to put a 76-year-old man on trial for 1969? September 2021. The preliminary hearing. Deputy District Attorney Chris Lindberg of the Cold Case Unit starts calling names. The DNA analysts come first, walking the court through the profile, the matches, the tree. But then the roll call changes, because Lindberg starts calling 1969 itself to the stand. Officers who responded to 39th Street as young patrolmen, now elderly men, describing that November night from the witness box. Then, a name you've been waiting for. The friend. The one who went to check on Mary that morning. I told you in Chapter 2 to keep counting witnesses. Here's the payoff. Under oath. 52 years later. And finally, the man I asked you to mark, all the way back in Chapter 1. The cab driver. The last routine moment of Mary's life was a short ride home. And the man behind that wheel walked into a courtroom. More than half a century later, raised his right hand and testified about it. One fair, remembered for 52 years. Judge J. Bloom heard it all and ruled the evidence was sufficient. John Sipos would stand trial for murder. March 2022. The trial. 1.5 weeks, start to finish. The prosecution built its case on 3 pillars. Pillar 1. The scene. Everything that apartment recorded about what happened that night. Pillar 2. The science. The profile developed from preserved evidence and the genealogy that led to one name. Pillar 3. The witness chain. Those living voices from 1969, linking the scene to the science, to the man at the defense table. Now, the defense. And I'm going to present it fairly because that's how trials work. His attorney, Brooke LaFrance, made 2 core arguments. First, time itself had damaged her client's ability to defend himself. 53 years had passed. Witnesses who might have helped him, people who could have spoken to his whereabouts, his character, his circumstances, were dead. You can't cross-examine a memory, and you can't subpoena a graveyard. Second, she argued the DNA evidence pointed toward someone else, an alternative suspect. The prosecution's answer was short. That person had been tested and excluded from the scene, which left the jury with the same question. This case had been building toward since the lab results came back. If the defendant was never there, how did his DNA get inside that apartment? The case went to the jury. Deliberations lasted less than a day. Guilty. Murder. In the first degree. 52 years. 4 months. After the door on 39th Street, 12 jurors said out loud what a sealed envelope had been holding the entire time. And sitting in that courtroom was Donna Weibel, Mary's daughter, one of the 2 little girls. Mary was working to bring home, now a grown woman, older than her mother ever got to be. But look around that courtroom, and you'll notice someone missing. Christine, Donna's sister, the other little girl. Christine died in a car accident decades before this verdict. She spent her whole life wanting to see this day. She never got it, so Donna sat there for both of them. And afterward, Donna summed up the entire 52-year case in 8 words. The DNA's there, and it doesn't lie. Now, the ending you were promised. In the hook, the law caught him. The calendar protected him. Here's what that means. Prosecutors alleged from the beginning that Mary was raped before she was killed. You've known that since Chapter 1. John Sipos was never charged with it. He couldn't be. The statute of limitations on that crime had expired decades before his arrest. The window to charge it closed, while the case was still cold. The evidence survived 50 years. The law did not. And then, the sentencing. April 22, 2022. Under California law, a defendant is sentenced under the punishment that existed when the crime was committed. Not 2022's punishment. 1969's. And in 1969, the maximum sentence for this conviction was 7 years to life. Read that however many times you need to. Not life without parole. Not 25 to life. 7 to life. The court imposed it because it was the absolute maximum available. There was nothing more to give. And under a sentence structured that way, parole eligibility arrives within just a few years. So here's the math. This case leaves behind, stated once, 51 years of freedom between the crime and the arrest. 7 years minimum. Owed. I'll let that sit. Was justice done? I'm not answering that for you. I genuinely don't think there's a clean answer. A record was set, the longest span between crime and conviction in San Diego County history. The system worked and fell short in the same breath. Tell me where you land in the comments. I read them, and this one I'll be reading closely. But before you go, I want to reset how this story gets remembered. For 50 years, 4 words did the remembering. You know which 4. So here's the correction. For the record, Mary Scott, 23. The dancer they called Lucky because she never let anyone down. The big sister, who said let her come when everyone else said go home. A mother, 2 years into a plan to bring her daughters back. That's who was behind that door. That's the name that belongs on this case. And the last word goes to what Rosalie proved. Right now, in evidence rooms across this country, there are hundreds of thousands of unsolved cases, many of them holding preserved evidence, sitting in the dark, waiting for the one phone call that wakes it up. Rosalie made that call, 50 years in, and it worked. If your family has a case like Mary's, ask about the evidence. Ask about genetic genealogy. Ask, even if it's been decades. The science doesn't care how long it's been. If this story reached you, share it. Because somebody watching, somewhere, has a drawer that needs opening. And subscribe to Crime Watch Hub, because the next case we open might be the one a family has waited 50 years to hear.